Colombia last night did something unprecedented and elected by a hair-thin margin a political outsider with no political party who came from completely outside of the traditional political power bases. No doubt Abelardo de la Espriella had support, very powerful figures, and moneyed interest, but that is not a criticism or a conspiracy theory. The business community, from small shopkeepers to tycoons, have been fed up with the last 4 years of improvisation and worsening security situations. Now, this guy, Abelardo de la Espriella, is a successful defense attorney. He does not come from a poor background. He comes from what his mother called a small town rich family in the north of the country near the Caribbean coast. He was actually born in Bogota, but grew up in one of the smaller cities in the North Atlantic section of the country. This man has made a name for himself and has had a career as a high-end defense attorney, taking on the cases and defending a lot of white-collar criminals, some people who have been part of the paramilitary-aligned mafias in the country. He has launched his own business ventures. He had a restaurant in Miami that did not do very well. He has had a line of liquor. He has a rum line. He has a clothing line. He has been a singer. But he no doubt has been a very prominent defense attorney. He has never held any public office. It's an interesting case. You have this man who's a Colombian. He was born in Colombia, but he also holds U.S. citizenship. He holds Italian citizenship. In 2004, he moved his family to Italy very publicly and said, yes, this is a lifelong dream of mine and such. But then he's come back and just out of nowhere, with no political party, none of the traditional, Colombia has about 5 or 6 major parties, and he's been, he's come from outside of all of them. He did sort of seek the support of the Centro Democrático, which is Álvaro Uribe's party, but former President Uribe. But they are friendly and their families have history together. But he did not get that party's backing or Uribe's backing. And Uribe ran his own candidate, who De la Espriella beat. And then they fell in behind him. So there's kind of a loose alliance there. President-elect De la Espriella will, barring any post-election drama, because it is a hair-thin margin, like I said, and there will be ballot scrutiny. But at this point, we don't have any reports of any kind of irregularities that would change the outcome. De la Espriella is taking over a very divided country, and if he is smart, he will understand that he was the first choice of a minority of the electorate. He will have a choice here. He can govern for the small, hardcore, base of support that he has, or he can be a conciliator. Colombia has a nasty history of political violence going back to the country's founding. The person who most Colombians see as the founder of the nation, Colombia's kind of George Washington figure, Simón Bolívar, barely escaped with his life during what was known back then in the early 1800s as the Septembrine Conspiracy, which was born out of a conflict in visions for the new country. For most of the country's history, hostility between the conservatives and the liberals, and these have been the two primary political parties for most of Colombia's history, and that's what they were called. This is the Conservative Party, and this is the Liberal Party. Now, today in Colombia, you have about 5 or 6 different major parties, but in the Liberal Party and Conservative Party are still around. Tellingly, neither one of them has really been a factor in the 21st century. You can go back and they're still around, but neither one of them really even had a presidential candidate as a contender in this year's election. But like I said, for most of Colombia's history, the liberal and conservative parties and politics broadly in Colombia has manifested itself with bullets every bit as much as with ballots. Even though Colombia has, for almost all of its history, been a real democracy, the country has for a very short time only had one military strongman dictator, and even he tried to be something of a reformer. Talking about back in the 1970s. Violence in Colombia, unfortunately, has always had a hand in politics. I was once at a talk in Medellin, and the businessman Chris Diaz was asked by somebody in the audience, when will Colombia advance? And his answer was, when we learn to stop hating each other. Now, last night, after the election results were announced, police stations in Kennedy and Bosa, these are poor neighborhoods in the southwest of Bogota, were attacked. Why? The police didn't do anything. It's like, I'm mad, I don't like the resort, so I'm going to go out and tear stuff up. Riot police were called out to Puerto Rellena in Cali after roads were blocked by supporters of the losing candidate Cepeda. Now, you're going to have conflicting reports of, well, were these peaceful protesters? They were blocking the roads, and the ESMAD, which is like the riot police, got called out, and maybe it was an overreaction. I don't know. I wasn't there. Again, I'm recording this kind of at dawn, the day after the election, so we don't really have all the facts yet. But my point is that, again, there is a tendency, unfortunately, to take to violent means for political ends. And that's why we have in Colombia these guerrilla groups, rebel groups, and then the vigilantes that turned into mafias as a countermeasure against these historically. There is a strain, even though the majority of people, I am convinced, want peace and are peaceable, you do have this kind of violent tradition that has led to things like the guerrilla groups, the FARC, the M19, the ELN, or right-wing paramilitary groups that, like the AUC, which is really just a mafia. The Gulf Clan came out, or the Gulf Clan today is a mafia that came out of political, I guess you could say, counter-revolutionaries, because if the FARC and the ELN were revolutionaries, then the AUC was formed to kind of oppose that. And that just morphed today into a mafia. They're not trying to overrun or overthrow the government or anything, but they're just now just criminals that are involved in extortion and human trafficking and drug trafficking and other different nefarious activities. So in Medellin, some supporters of the president-elect, so Abelardo de la Espriella supporters, turned up with bats and clubs outside of Plaza Mayor, which is one of the main public squares in Medellin, and this is where the big convention center is. And they weren't there to tear anything up, but they basically were anticipating violence from, let's say, supporters of Cepeda, and they came out to do battle. Now, fortunately, nothing happened. Nobody came except for the police to keep the calm. And there were no rioters, or there were no Cepeda militants, if you will. But this shows you the tensions, and it also shows you the tendency. And you have these people with these violent tendencies on whatever side. It's not like you can say, oh, it's just these people on the left, or it's just these people on the right. No, it's something that is, and that has infected, if I may, the society here, the political culture here, and most people are against it. Most people do not participate in it, but there are enough people who do, that this tendency remains alive throughout much of Colombian history up until today. So again, there was no violence in Medellin reported, and throughout the country overall, the elections have taken place peacefully, and last night was a peaceful night. There may be we'll see today what kind of reports we get, but the Colombian people should be very proud of the elections that they have held in this polarized time. So, outgoing President Gustavo Petro has called for calm, but he has also complained about U.S. President Donald Trump's open support of the winner, De La Espriella. But he also seems to forget that just months ago, Petro himself was in the U.S. and called on, while he was in the U.S. visiting, he called on the U.S. military to turn against its own government. But he gets mad when the U.S. president supports his opposition candidate. Now, I think that governments should not, and public figures like that, politicians should not interfere in other governments, but they've both broken this rule, to be fair. Anyway, Trump did support De La Espriella, and De La Espriella has won, and so the U.S. government has already come out, and a lot of governments around the world have already come out, even those that are not necessarily so aligned with Cepeda, but just out of respect, have congratulated the winning candidate. And so Petro and Ivan Cepeda, the losing candidate, have both said that while they acknowledge the preliminary vote count, they will not concede until an official final count, and are calling for a scrutiny of the ballots. So they're not kind of saying, oh, they stole the election. They're not kind of being irresponsible, like, again, to mention, they are, I guess, kind of hedging their response, so they are not outright saying that the election was fraudulent, or they're not calling the results into dispute, but they are waiting for the official results before they make a final, before they concede. And so what happens in Colombia is that, and the system is generally very efficient in my opinion, but the same day you get the preliminary count. So all the ballots are reported. And so within hours in Colombia, they can say, okay, this is who, we have all the different polling places reporting. And so we have a winner, but then those results are reviewed officially. And at some point, the election officials, which in Colombia are part of the judiciary, so they're not part of the executive branch of government, will make a final and official proclamation. That has not happened yet, but the results so far, there are no credible, let's say, disputations or challenges to them. Now, a lot can happen. We will see what happens, but as right now, it looks like it's very clear that De La Espriella has won the elections. Now, what has happened here? 3 weeks ago in Colombia, we had the first round of presidential voting, and the early favorite, Paloma Valencia of the right-wing establishment, the Centro Democrático Party, which was backed by former President Álvaro Uribe. He really kind of controls that party. It's like his party, basically. Came in third place, behind right-wing outsider Abelardo de la Espriella, who I've mentioned. So Paloma Valencia, who was a senator, was kind of the establishment candidate, if you will. And I say establishment meaning if you go back the past 20 years. So on the right, you had Álvaro Uribe, who was president from, I think, 2002 to 2010. He had 2 terms of 4 years. Then Juan Manuel Santos, who came out of that, who was an ally of Uribe, then was president for 2 terms. Santos was outside of Uribe's party. They started out as allies, but they fell out when Santos did not want to take orders from Uribe. But Uribe basically has kind of been the most dominant figure on the right, and has had a big block in Congress, much bigger than the Conservative Party or the Liberal Party, who today, so the Colombian Liberal Party would be they're not like Democratic Socialist or anything, or they're really more of kind of a centrist party, if you will. But still, the traditional parties, the conservatives and liberals, have not had dominant roles in Colombian politics in the 21st century, even though they are both still around. Anyway, Paloma, to a lot of people's surprise, to my surprise actually, came in third place. So this outsider, so what people were basically saying in my analysis is, look, we are maybe not left-wing people, or maybe we don't support socialist or socialism, but we're tired of you, Álvaro Uribe. We're tired of your movement and your influence. And so we're going to vote for the right-wing outsider as a rejection of your Centro Democrático movement. Why? A lot of reasons. One of the things is Uribe's just kind of aging, and a lot of people are just tired of him and feel like he might be holding the people with that political persuasion back. Uribe is now a convict. He has been convicted of witness tampering and bribery. Actually, in a case involving Ivan Cepeda, the left wing candidate. They are two kind of nemesis, or I guess you can fairly say enemies. And so people are saying, look, we're not going to advance. You're holding us back, essentially. I believe that is the statement that the electorate, at least those sections of the electorate who don't support Ivan Cepeda, have said, look, yeah, we want a pro-capitalist, a pro-business candidate, but just not you, or just not one who is under your thumb or under your control. So in Colombia, there's an open first round, which can have a bunch of different candidates, and the top 2 vote getters go on to a final second round, unless any one candidate gets 50% plus 1 of the vote. Now, most people thought Cepeda would come in first place. He wanted to get over 50% of the vote, but the pundits and the pollsters said that he would probably come in first place, but still the vote would go to a runoff. He would not get 50% of the votes. What actually happened is he came in second place, which really kind of, I think, rattled the left, because it showed that there, something like 60% or more of the voters were not going to be aligned with the left-wing candidate. Of course, they were able to mobilize kind of their organized grassroots, if you will. But De La Espriella comes in first place, Cepeda comes in second place, and the Centro Democrático candidate, Paloma Valencia, just came in third place. Now, like I said, my take on this is very clear. Colombians have rejected Alvaro Uribe and his Uribismo movement. What happens now, we will see. They would disagree. I'm sure they would disagree with what I'm saying, because they have these very fervent, hardcore supporters. But I saw things like, I live 5 minutes away from Alvaro Uribe's house, and this area where I am is like the Uribe heartland. And a lot of people who I know personally who have been kind of loyal Uribistas or Uribe supporters, when I saw, even in the first round, that they kind of had abandoned Uribe and were going with De La Espriella, I said, something's not, not that I care or have a stake in it one way or another, but I said, this is really something to see. A lot of the traditional Uribistas that I know had already abandoned him, even back in the spring, even back before the first rounds of the election. So they have rejected Gustavo Petro's collectivist socialist experiment. Now, of course, they still have a big block of supporters, but they have rejected Uribe as the flag bearer for the right, a sort of, we don't like them, but we don't like you either. Now, what has happened in the past 3 weeks? Pretty much what I expected once we saw the results of the first round. The outgoing president's political machine moved to mass mobilization. Get the buses out, get the chivas out. Those are those big kind of colorful buses. Get the affinity groups, such as indigenous leaders, to mobilize, unions. And then something interesting happened. A government worker I know in immigration was told and convinced that she would lose her job if De La Espriella wins. Her union told her this, of course. So now you have the unions mobilizing, and you can say, is it fair? Are they doing dirty tricks? In Colombia, like anywhere in any democracy or any country, there's pretty much, you're going to have dirty tricks, and you have some in certain areas of Colombia. You have a history of vote buying, kind of like what you used to have in the U.S. back in the South. I've seen this in Colombia, and I know families generally from low income areas where they have, especially on the Atlantic coast, where they'll go and they'll give you, and it's usually some cheap things like a food basket or a raffle to win a TV or something. And it's not just in Colombia. I've seen this in Mexico. I was an electoral observer in Mexico. I was an electoral observer in Nicaragua. I was an electoral observer in Dominican Republic. And in Mexico, I've seen things like this. In Nicaragua, I've seen things like this. But Cepeda and Petro's movement has, and I'm not saying they're the only ones or they're the ones who did this, or that, this happens. It's not a right or left thing in Colombia. It is kind of largely you see this more in the rural areas and in the small towns, but you do see it a lot in the coastal cities like Cartagena, Barranquilla, Santa Marta, these kinds of places, Sincelejo, Monteria, Buenaventura. But Cepeda and Petro's movement has counted on its ability to mass mobilize people through group affiliation. So yes, they do a lot of identity politics, and they say you're in this indigenous group, you're part of this, and you have to listen to your cacique, you have to listen to your boss or your community leader and do what they say, and then count on those groups to go and mobilize their own structures. And this is that machine politics that even takes place in the U.S., especially historically. You've seen the machines, the big democratic machines that you've had in places like Chicago and Cleveland, where it's like you're the ward boss or the party boss and or the union boss, and your job is going to be you've got to mobilize all these members and deliver. And if you deliver, then you're going to be rewarded for that. So you go through these organized structures to get out the vote. It's not something that's unique to Colombia. And it is very effective, and it closed the gap. It really was effective in the second round, but not quite enough. That's why the elections, the first round, you had the vast majority of people who voted for the opposition candidates, the people who were not the leftist candidates. But if you look at what the Petro Cepeda machine did in this last round, it's very impressive. On the other hand, the split vote that I'm talking about between Paloma Valencia and Abelardo de la Espriella united, sort of, but not in a very coordinated fashion. There was no real way to mobilize lukewarm people that were not already behind one of these two candidates. So yeah, they might not like Cepeda, but there's not the kind of movement when you talk about like small business people and not just business people, but people who work in companies or whatever, or people who just for their own reasons are not part of some kind of structure that can be mobilized the way that the left can with its collectivist ideology or philosophy. So the whole thing with the left is we're collectivist and you're part of these identity groups. And so if you affiliate with this, then we can mobilize you by mobilizing your leadership and incentivizing your leadership to get out there. The business community has largely already been opposed to the Petro /Cepeda project, but they don't really, like I said, they don't have the same mobilization machinery in place. Now, there will be a lot of time for more journalism on this, but I want to get you this initial reporting very quickly. So we're talking about dawn of the day, the Monday after the elections. Beyond the dynamic that I just explained, let's look at some of the other factors that have come into play. And there are several. The outgoing president, Gustavo Petro, ran his administration like some kind of Game of Thrones or some kind of reality show. On average, he was replacing cabinet ministers every 3 weeks, and they were full of all this intrigue, and it was out in the public, all this backstabbing. So it's like Armando Benedetti is like this like Sinfingali kind of figure, and then Laura Sarabia and their leaked tapes of the disputes between them, and then Alvaro Leiva, who was the foreign minister and ended up being an enemy of Petro and putting out all of these damning letters accusing Petro of being a drug addict and all kind of different things. It was nonstop drama and intrigue. Cepeda's message of "we're going to stay the course" ran up against that. Now, he claims that he would be a better administrator. He is a very different figure than Petro. They are politically aligned, but Cepeda is I have a lot of respect for him as a person. He's a thoughtful guy. He seems to have a lot of integrity. He's an intellectual. And Petro is kind of a rabble-rouser, bomb thrower kind of, and I don't mean that literally, make no mistake, but he's the incendiary kind of community leader kind of guy, not a thoughtful person who really thinks out a formal ideology and applies any kind of intellectual rigor to his method of governance. But that whole Petro's drama and tendency to say just random crazy things on Twitter did not help Ivan Cepeda. the way that the Petro administration treated Vice President Francia Marquez. Petro sort of used her to try to get the Afro-Colombian vote, but once they got elected, they tried to sideline her and treat her as a token. So it's like, you're here because you look like an Afro-Colombian. Well, she is Afro-Colombian. She's like she's an activist, and she's an award-winning human rights advocate and lawyer. But once they got in office, they basically tried to use her as a mascot, and she justifiably rebelled against that and has called out her own administration, this Petro administration, for their corruption, and she has called them racist for really just treating her. Back in the U.S., we had this term, especially like back in the 60s and 70s, a token black, and it's like they're going to make some kind of commercial on TV, and like in the 1950s, like you would only see what I guess you would call Anglos, okay? But then in the 70s and maybe in the late 60s, they would say like, we'll have like this commercial, and there's like 12 white people, and we'll put one black person in the commercial, and they would call that a token black person and just stick them in there. Not that they really, it was part of their I don't know how you want. I mean, it's a complicated thing, but just to like say they had one, okay? Like, we'll make this TV commercial for this product, for some beverage or some kind of, I don't know, food or canned goods or something like that. And you've got all these people, and you've got this monoculture, and then like, let's just stick somebody in there. Now, they never even had like a Native American person or American Indian or like Latino Americans. They were basically just invisible. And they kind of, the point is that they kind of used Francia Marquez like this, and she picked up on it and spoke out against it, even while she is still the sitting vice president, which right now she is. But she has fallen out with Petro and her own administration, and they have moved her out because she actually expected to have a voice and a functional role in the administration. And their role was like, get out of here, go shut up, go sit down, go out there and go visit out there in the sticks somewhere, and go and visit some isolated group. And they really wanted to use her as a mascot. And she is now, even while still in office, outspoken against that. Now, Ivan Cepeda picked Ida Quilque, who was another I guess advocate for. She's not a lawyer or anything, like at least Francia Marquez was a lawyer, or is a lawyer. Ida Quilque is a she never went to college. She is a like indigenous rights activist from the NASA community, which is mostly located down like around like towards Cali, if you would say between the Eje Cafetero, between Coffee Country and down towards Cali and Cauca in that region. Actually, the same part of the country where Francia Marquez is from. But her career has been kind of as an indigenous rights activist. And it looks kind of almost like she's being used in the same way. That is the suspicion. It's not like you can say that because they're not in office, so you can't say what kind of role she would have or not have. But an interesting thing with Francia Marquez is over the past 4 years, she's actually seemed to be more serious than Petro, who has a habit of crazy talk. While people thought that, at the beginning, maybe she's not ready for this role. And they sort of chuckled when Petro picked her. But she has actually turned out to be more serious if you listen to her speak than Petro, who is just, he'll go off and invent. I mean, he like gets up and starts talking about quantum physics while on a nationally televised cabinet meeting, and he just starts making stuff up. Okay, Francia Marquez, like her or not, like her policies or not, has been a thoughtful, respectable vice president. Now maybe it's not fair, but you can blame the like I said, the Petro administration for creating this environment. Alvaro Uribe's first candidate choice was not Paloma Valencia. It was Miguel Uribe Turbay, who is no relation. Uribe is a kind of a fairly popular name. He was assassinated on the orders of, according to Gustavo Petro's own attorney general, the Segunda Marquetalia, a FARC dissident structure co-founded by Jesus Santrich, who was part of the FARC, who was on his way. He was captured and on his way to be extradited to the United States until that was blocked by Ivan Cepeda's efforts, who then was a senator and a peace negotiator. And well, he was a negotiator for the government. And he said, no, Jesus Santrich is a peace negotiator. This guy's like a FARC murderer and narco trafficker. That's what he was actually getting extradited for, was narco trafficking. But Ivan Cepeda blocked that. And whether fair or not, this is emblematic for a lot of people in Colombia of Cepeda's nurturing approach to these guerrilla groups who have been getting stronger under the Pacto Histórico, the Gustavo Petro movement's dialogue first approach. Aside from that, the current administration is stained with several corruption scandals, including the UNGRD scandal. Now, the UNGRD is like in the U.S., it's kind of like FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So if you have an earthquake or a flooding somewhere, or like when a hurricane hit up in the San Andres Archipelago, then the UNGRD is the government unit that's supposed to come in and deal with these types of natural emergencies and floods and calamities and such. But there was all this money that was destined to bring water to poor isolated families in the deserts of La Guajira, which is the peninsula up there on the Atlantic coast in the Venezuelan border. But they took all this money, and these are Petro's people. I'm not saying that he personally did it, but his appointees and his people in his administration stole all this money that was supposed to go to help the poor indigenous people, and they stole it and redirected it for a political bribery fund. That they had this money that they were going to use in literal suitcases full of money to bribe Congress people to move through Petro's political agenda, his reforms, as he calls it. They got busted, they got caught, and now people are in jail already. One person actually died, and this is still matriculating through the justice system. The ongoing scandals with Ricardo Roa, who was Petro's campaign manager, and then Petro put him in charge of Ecopetrol, the state-run, the largest company in Colombia, the state-controlled petroleum company. Roa had no experience or background in hydrocarbons or petroleum or energy, but he's Petro's loyal guy. And so Roa gets in there, and there are these charges now, he's facing charges of influence peddling. And that's a complicated case. I won't get into it now, or we're going to be here till tomorrow. But we have covered it. So read Finance Colombia. There's a fiasco with the printing of Colombian passports, where Petro tried to cancel the contract with an existing firm that's been printing Colombian passports for the last decade and move them to where he said so politically, without the due process of contracting, like an open, fair licitation and such. So there's that scandal. And then a recent move that really pissed off the paisas of Medellin and Antioquia, the appointment of indicted former mayor Daniel Quintero to a government position supervising the finances of the country's health system. So you have here a guy who has something like 40 counts of indictment for corruption, though let me be clear, he has not yet been convicted. And you appoint him to supervise the finances of the country's primary health system? Usually when people are facing charges, they say something like, I am innocent, but I will resign to focus on clearing my name. But this guy's like full steam ahead. Okay, so that undoubtedly costs votes with those who prioritize clean government. Again, Quintero has not been convicted of anything. The justice process needs to take its course. But a lot of people, especially in Antioquia, especially in Medellin, where he has been mayor, are furious with him, and that certainly cost Ivan Cepeda votes in Antioquia and especially in Medellin. Cepeda's running mate, Ida Quilque, who I've mentioned already, who never went to college, and I don't hold that against her. That doesn't make you mean that you're smart or not. But what she did, though, is she accused graduates of Colombia's private universities of only learning how to rob and steal. So she grouped all these people, like if you graduated from a private university, then you're a thief and you're part of the ruling class. And it's this whole class populism, class hatred thing. She tried to walk back that statement after it blew up in her face and caused all of this outrage and backlash. But the damage was done, and it sort of reminded me. I hate to say this, but this is what I think of. I think of Pol Pot, who in Cambodia, who wanted to kill all the educated people, and your life was in danger if you just wore glasses. I'm not saying she's Pol Pot or wanted to clear people to kill anybody, but she clearly was attacking people who went to private universities in Colombia, many of which have no elite pretensions and specialize in educating low-income students. So it's not like, oh, this is a private university, so it's only for rich people and the public universities are only for poor people. Though some people want to paint it that way, it's not like that at all. There are some rich, fancy universities, absolutely. But the vast majority of private universities, some of them aren't even that good. I mean, and you see this in other places too, but she was like, the people who went to private universities only, this is what she said, only learned how to rob and steal while they were there. So that's a lot of, like, probably most people who went to college, I would say, in Colombia. What do I think will happen now? Assuming the vote count is not overturned, which I don't see any reason that it would be, De La Espriella will take over the executive branch with no political machinery in Congress. So in Colombia, August 7th is the inauguration day when they change presidents. So under 2 months away. And De La Espriella will have to negotiate to get anything done. This is not a situation like El Salvador or Venezuela where you just come in and take over the whole government and do what you want. Colombia, to its credit, has strong institutions. Had Cepeda won, he would come in with the largest block of legislators already in Congress and possibly would find it relatively easy to push through his agenda. With De La Espriella, not so much, and I think that this is actually a good thing. Personally, just me, I like divided government as a concept because it encourages moderation, consensus, and negotiation. You got to go and get other people on board with what you want to do, and you can't just run roughshod over those people in your country who are not fully under your influence, let's say. I expect the guerrilla groups to attempt to seize the initiative, and we will see their violence increase in the short term. I hope not, but this is a prediction. It's like, I hope a hurricane doesn't come, but if I'm the weatherman and I'm looking and it's like, well, there's a storm out there in the Atlantic and it looks like it's headed this way. But as these groups try to assert their authority, and long term, I think they are worse off, and they know the military will be after them soon, so they will try to make what hay they can while the sun shines, as we would say. Expect them to try to punish the country for electing the candidate most hostile to them and to their interest. Outgoing President Gustavo Petro will not shut up once he's out of office. He will become a full-time Twitter addict and will make as much noise as possible in opposition to the incoming administration. Unlike former President Juan Manuel Santos, Petro will be more like Alvaro Uribe, who has remained addicted to the spotlight, to influence, and to the thrill of power. In many places, there's a tradition of former presidents ceding the spotlight. So like if you go, and this is really kind of all around the world where it's like, okay, you had your time, you were the president. Now you're like the retired guy. So like George Bush went off and started painting watercolors and such. Ivan Duque, the last president, I think he's back in the United States. He's in a think tank somewhere. And if such a tradition exists in Colombia, Petro isn't going to follow it. Petro is an attention addict and will take every opportunity to travel around the world and throughout Colombia to speak, as he is entitled to, and to fashion for himself some kind of role as the dear father of the oppressed, which is how he sees himself. He sees himself as the great guy to help the pueblo and to help the campesinos and the people in the barrios. And he sees himself as like this great father. Petro and Cepeda and their movement, if not explicitly, then tacitly, reactivate the Primera Línea, which is kind of the aggressive activist movement, not a formal organization, but a youth street movement that sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently mobilizes in opposition to whoever opposes the Pacto Histórico. Last night, we already saw violence in the low-income areas of Bogota. We saw riot police called out in Cali. And it's not always like somebody just gives an order and says, okay, go out now and protest. or go out now and riot or tear things up, even though there are accusations of that. For example, against Petro ally Gustavo Bolivar, who aside from being a left-wing senator allied with Petro and Cepeda, is famous for writing the hit soap opera, and forgive me for this, but this is what the soap opera is actually called, at least translated, "Without titties, there is no paradise." Don't blame me. That is what his soap opera that was on TV in Colombia was called. He's the one who wrote it. I'm reporting. Colombian law says that the runner-up in the presidential election gets a seat in the Senate, so Cepeda will return to the Senate where he will lead the opposition. He already has a block of 30 legislators behind him and is a Senate veteran, so he will be a very powerful voice. Now, what do I hope will happen? I hope Abelardo will have a plan to lift up the poor and the marginalized, and Colombia has plenty of people who fit into that category. He says in his speech last night that he will govern for all the people, and I hope so. This was a very polarized election. People who feel excluded from opportunities largely voted for Cepeda and now feel like they have lost. Espriella has a window of opportunity to do what he said in his election night speech and govern for all Colombians. I also hope that he understands that with less than 50% of the vote, the only mandate he has is for an inclusive, conciliatory approach. His administration is inheriting a fiscal mess as the current government has run up the debt. And I hope that along with Vice President Jose Manuel Restrepo, who I have a lot of respect for his time as commerce minister and finance minister in the last administration before the current one that's in power, I hope that they can properly manage this and navigate Colombia's economy through rough times. As the government will need to find dollars to make these debt payments, the peso will eventually fall unless the U.S. does something stupid to wreck its own currency. The opposition will try to blame the new administration for this, even though they planted the seeds for the fiscal weeds that are soon sprouting. I also hope that Colombia will become safer for Colombians and that the guerrilla groups, the mafias, and the drug traffickers will shrink. It may be utopian to think that they will be eliminated in 4 years, but my hope is that Colombia becomes safer, especially for poor Colombians who are by far the primary victims of these groups. In recent years, unlike the old days, the rich have largely been insulated from the depredations of these guerrillas and extortionists. So like back in the day, if you were, if you had not even rich, but just like anybody was at risk of being kidnapped and a ransom putting on you or robbed and such. But right now, the violence and the extortion, all this kind of stuff largely takes place in the poor urban neighborhoods and in the countryside, especially way out in isolated areas. So I hope that De La Espriella goes after these bad guys, but in a way that respects and protects human rights, which is something that Alvaro Uribe failed to do during his time in power, leading to many innocent people being victims, not just of the guerrillas, but of state violence. And you had like the falsos positivos, the false positive scandals that took place with Uribe. You have the paramilitary alignment that Uribe's brother is convicted of. That's to say, forming paramilitary groups, the 12 discípulos, which means the 12 disciples, which was like a paramilitary group. So I sincerely hope and will be watching closely that the state will be a protector of the poor rather than a victimizer of them. Many poor people suffered, like I said, under Uribe's watch, and many continue to suffer under the current Petro government that has simply not protected them from the depredations of groups like the ELN, the Clan del Golfo, or the FARC dissidents. So you can say, oh, I'm for the poor, but then you're soft on crime, and the main people who get victimized by crime is the poor. Now, let's look at people to watch under this turn of events here. Current Interior Minister Armando Benedetti. He has been Petro's consigliere, but seems to hold some kind of weird power over Petro. The U.S. government, or in other words, Donald Trump, placed him on the Clinton list, which is like people that are, blocked from the international financial system, which will complicate his life personally and professionally once he's out of office. He's also a very kind of volatile, unpredictable person who is a longtime political player and not the type who's just going to sit quietly and go retire to the golf course. So we'll see what happens with him. I already mentioned Daniel Quintero, the former mayor of Medellin, who is already battling serious corruption charges. And while he found a friend in Gustavo Petro, that protection will no longer be there. There will be no place for him in the incoming government, obviously. And he still has to face all of these charges with no power to protect his allies. Many of them he also took with him into the Petro government. And they're also indicted. Are they going to turn on him and spill their frijoles? We already see somebody was arrested in Medellin who was in the former administration of Quintero, who has agreed to turn state's evidence, basically, and testify against him in the hopes of getting a reduced prison sentence. And I think we're going to see more of that. So that's going to be something to watch closely if you are interested in that kind of thing. Is it going to have a big direct effect on business and investment? No, but if you care about or follow Colombian politics, that's something to watch. Alvaro Uribe, no doubt pleased. Well, he didn't get his first choice, which was his own candidate, but he and De La Espriella clearly share a fondness, and their families go way back. Espriella's father was a Liberal Party supporter of Uribe, and Uribe awarded him with the juicy notary appointment way back decades ago when Uribe was the president. And so what happens is you appoint somebody a notary, and they're kind of like the town registrar, and they keep documents like housing deeds and stuff. And it's a really juicy business opportunity, but it comes from a government appointment. Now, let me say that objectively, this is a win for the business sector. Business groups like Finalco and Andi, these are like chambers of commerce type groups, have expressed their support for Abelardo, and Abelardo has expressed his explicit support for example, the petroleum and mining sectors. And I just don't see any major businesses or trade groups in Colombia that have come out in support of Ivan Cepeda. And certainly Cepeda and Petro have support from individual business people, but as organized industry groups, I just haven't seen it anywhere. I want to finish with some anecdotes. And the polls closed barely 12 hours ago, and overnight I have tried to gather the opinions of a few people. Again, overnight, Sunday night, so this is not a scientific poll or anything. But what I am hearing from Colombians, I just wanted to share with you. And these, like I said, these are strictly anecdotes. I spoke to a member of the YU community in La Guajira who tells me that they went, that her community went for Cepeda, and so they're not so pleased. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting to me because the whole UNGRD scandal took money from them and was kind of like the money that was stolen was actually destined for their community. But on the other hand, they have Ida Quilque, who's an indigenous Colombian, and the appointment of her kind of represents an attempt to include these groups. In a split family that I spoke with, a husband and a wife, both professionals, but from humble backgrounds. The husband, who's a labor lawyer who contracts with the government, went for Cepeda. But his wife, a middle manager in a bank, went for De La Espriella. A school teacher in Bogota who comes from a very poor family in the worst parts of the south side of Bogota absolutely was thrilled with the Espriella victory. She was early in the tank for Espriella because her whole thing, her number one issue was crime. Her number one issue was anti-crime. She wants somebody who is going to crack down. She's been a victim of crime. She's afraid to go out. This is somebody I've known for a long time who just finds the streets of Bogota to be a jungle. She lives in a better neighborhood now than where she grew up, kind of in the north, not the rich part of Bogota, but there's an area, if you know Bogota, called Suba. And Suba has middle income parts and lower income parts, but it's a vast area. And she actually shared video with me of people in Suba out celebrating the De La Espriella win. A psychologist I know who originally voted for Sergio Fajardo in the first round, who's a moderate former Medellin mayor who ran but lost, told me that she voted blank. And so in Colombia, you can vote in blanco, which means I'm showing up to vote. I'm doing my civic duty, but I disapprove of both of these candidates. So I'm casting a vote, but it is explicitly not for either one. And she saw both of these candidates as extremists, according to her, a left-wing extremist versus a right-wing extremist. And she was disgusted at her country's polarization. A police officer, a career police officer that I know, commented to me, better this local, meaning de la Espriella, than the other local. Again, kind of there's that ambivalence. And I think that this is a common sentiment. It was not an endorsement of one, but thinking the other was the worst option. So it's like, I don't really like either one of these. But I'm going to go with this guy because I think the other guy would be worse. Again, as a police officer, he's very much anti-crime, from a humble family, not a poor family, but kind of what in Colombia they would call estrato dos tres, somebody who they're all working people. They don't have any capital. Let's say that they have jobs. Sister's an account executive in media, not a big shot executive, but like just a working stiff who makes a decent living. Other sister, I think, is like a pharmacist or something like that. Third sister went off to go work in Spain and moved abroad. An immigration worker who worked for the government, kind of, if you think about the people who work in immigration and passport control and at the airports and that kind of thing. I mentioned earlier she was told to vote for Cepeda by her union, or that she would be threatened with losing her job. Not like we're going to fire you if you vote for that guy, but if that guy wins, he's going to come in here and eliminate our jobs. Right now, I don't think that's very credible because that government agency is actually understaffed, and they have gone on strike against Petro, or they've done work slowdowns and protests and such because the current government, the outgoing government, has not allocated money to staff them adequately. So the last thing I think is going to happen, if they're understaffed now, they're not going to lose their jobs. A domestic worker, a maid who takes care of old people that I know, told me that she voted for De La Espriella, hoping again that he will take action against the rising crime and violence. The thing that I'm seeing with a lot of low-income people, again, they're the main victims of violence. And a lot of them did go for Cepeda, but the ones that didn't, it's the violence, it's the crime, it's the guerrillas. If the current government had done a good job and actually reduced this total peace fiasco, if they actually were able to implement some total peace or partial peace, or reduce the amount of crime and the amount of guerrilla activity, Cepeda might have won in a landslide. There were pro-Cepeda protests and some street violence in the mostly poor southwest of Bogota, like I mentioned, but there were celebrations in parts of the north of Bogota, like I mentioned, like in Suba. I'm not saying that all of Suba or most of Suba went for De La Espriella. I'm saying that these are anecdotes. These are witness accounts, okay? But in the high-income Poblado area of Medellin, there were celebrations like Colombia just won the World Cup. I started getting reports and people sending me video, and good Lord, everybody's out their windows and beeping their horns, and parades are spontaneous, not organized parades, just people running out in the street. You think that Colombia won the World Cup. So, absolutely overwhelming right there. Even where I live, which is kind of a rural area about an hour away from the city of Medellin, even here, about an hour after the elections, spontaneous car parades, firecrackers all night. The dogs were freaking out. We have a couple dogs and they're freaking out because the people in celebration were launching firecrackers. And my neighbors are kind of far away because this is out in the sticks where I am. But even out here, you could hear the celebrations. These are just anecdotes. There's nothing scientific to take from this. I'm sure that had Cepeda won, you have other areas that would have been celebrating instead. Small business people and Colombian investors I know have been to a person celebrating. Now, to be clear and fair, Finance Colombia is a business-oriented publication, and I simply know a lot more business people and entrepreneurs than I know community organizers and militant activists on the left. So this is not any kind of objective sample. We are all biased by our peer groups and our social groups and the people that we know. I'm simply sharing personal feedback here at this last section gathered the very night of the election. So this is just some anecdotal feedback that I thought I would share with you. I'm not saying that this translates into any kind of, the last part of what I'm saying, into any kind of overall analysis. The most important takeaway, and something Colombians should be very proud of, is that they have just held peaceful, free, and fair elections. Not every country can do that. A lot of hard work remains and a lot can still go wrong. Count on Finance Colombia to bring you timely updates and analysis. And so that you don't miss out, take a moment to subscribe right now, not just to the channel or podcast, but to our newsletter. Go to fcsubscribe.com and get yourself a free subscription, and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I'm Lauren Moss, and remember, next to kindness, curiosity is the greatest virtue. Remain skeptical, stay smart, and by all means, think for yourself. See you soon.